Today I thought I'd take a look at the Moog Grandmother versus the Sub 37. I've had this for a few weeks now and I was sitting there playing with it a couple of nights ago and just making a sort of drone sound and got lost in myself making it. And I wondered whether the Sub 37 could do similar things. I don't really use the Sub 37 for ambient bits. I know I've done an ambient style video with the Sub 37, but it was still melodic. So just doing stuff like this. Is not something I tend to do on this. So I had a little play around and I'll flick through the sounds in a minute and show you exactly what I've done here. But let's just take a look at what I did. I'm using the latch on the Sub 37 as a drone. I suppose that's what it's for. So it's pretty good, that, I think. I'm using the H9 spring reverb. It doesn't sound the same as the reverb on the Grandmother. The Grandmother's got its own spring reverb built in. But if I turn it up, so I don't really expect the H9 to do something quite so similar. I can't get it quite into shot here because obviously as it's a mechanical part in the Grandmother, it's a bit like throwing, I don't know, a shopping trolley down the stairs from two different supermarkets and asking them to sound the same. So I'm going to look at the sound qualities of these really, because obviously they're completely different synths. This has got all the C inputs and outputs. This has got just four CV inputs. It's got pitch, filter, volume, and it's got keyboard and gate. So obviously this is a more self-contained instrument. It doesn't play as well with modular kit, but it does have its editor. It's got its patch memories, two LFOs, two complex envelope generators. It's got different filter slopes. So they're nowhere near comparable from a functions point of view. So just want to listen to the sounds and see if the characters of the synths are the same. And if you are trying to do sort of droney stuff, can you use your Sub 37 if you've already got one? And does the flexibility of the extra modulation section, which is effectively an extra oscillator, you know, how much flexibility does that give you? And do the oscillators sound different? Do you get more distortion from this? I've seen reviews saying you get more distortion from the mixer. Does the filter sound the same? So let's have a little play around with it. Let's start to unpick the sound I've got there, shall we? It's effectively just two oscillators and modulating the cutoff with the modulation section. And I'm just changing the rate of the modulation and messing about with the cutoff and the amount of modulation using the attenuator. I'll bring noise in later, but noise is different on the two synths. This is white, and on the Sub 37, it's pink noise. So the Sub 37's got a much darker feel and quality to the noise, which doesn't work as well on some sounds, but works better on others, obviously. So unpicking those sounds, oscillator one's a thin pulse. And looking at the waveforms of these, compared to C1's inverted, but the Sub 37's got some weirdness going on in the corners. Makes it sound a bit more, I hate to say the word fizzy. The Grandmother to me sounds much smoother. And on top of that pulse, I've got 3 octaves up, sawtooth, and I've got it synced for making those lovely sync effects, as I've been adjusting the pitch amount with the LFO on both of them. Let's turn that down a little on each. We're in the same ballpark, aren't we? Well, let's have a look at that square again. Let's just take oscillator 2 off. It's handy just being able to turn them on and off on the sub 37. Let's have a look at the square. And let's see what happens to it as we go over 12 o'clock on each of them to see how the mixer reacts. So let's see the shape of the wave as we take it past 12 o'clock. Doesn't look like it's doing anything different, like it's getting distorted. It just looks like it's getting larger. Let's try that over here. Again, it doesn't look like it's being awfully distorted, like I was expecting. So let's try it on the sawtooth. There, you can definitely see something on the top left, can't you? Knocking it out of shape. And you can hear it as well, obviously. Triangle. I think that's most obvious on that, isn't it? Let's try that on the sub 37 again then. You can see a flattening off of the curve, and you can hear it slightly, but it's not as pronounced as it is on the Grandmother. And now to the triangle. Doesn't look like there's much distortion or sound like it compared to this. I remember one of the first videos I made of the sub 37 and I'd left everything up over 12 o'clock. And a couple of people pointed out that should have gone into distortion, so it might not have been a great comparison against the Voyager. But I initially looked at this and hadn't made much difference to me then. So let's take a look at the frequency analysis. If we're getting distortion, you'd expect the harmonic content to change. So with that, it's not changing, it's just getting larger. Let's take a look at the sawtooth again. Possibly a bit of a change there between 2 and 5 kilohertz. But let's try that on the sub 37. Let's put the sawtooth on. I don't see much change in that, so let's try the triangle. Well, you can see it on that, can't you? So when you can see the wave shape change in the oscilloscope, you can really see it in the frequency analyzer as well. And that completely changes the harmonics there. And just for the hell of it, let's see if it does it on the square. You can see it changing slightly, but nothing as pronounced as the triangle. Anyway, there are differences there. So back to the initial drone sound. Now the small pulse. and a sawtooth. And now let's start messing around with the modulation settings. Let's turn the attenuator up and we've got the wave out. We're using a sine wave here. On the sub 37 we don't have a sine though. We've got a triangle. But there's no triangle on the Grandmother. So I've used the slightly different wave shape. We could try it with the ramp. So let's add a little of the modulation to the cutoff frequency. Ramps on. Same over here. So let's get the cutoffs the same. Let's get them both to around 200 Hz. Same on here. And now if we add the modulation. It's modulating that in a slightly different way. It's got much more of a pulse to it. Let's turn it higher. And this shows that matching more complex sounds on the two of them will be very difficult if you're using a lot of modulation. So let's try that on a square. And you can hear under there's the underlying tone at the cutoff frequency. And that sound's always in it. So this sounds almost like it's bipolar because it seems to be dropping the bottom frequencies so they disappear completely. Checking that on a sine, nice and slowly. You can hear that's going well below the 200 Hz there. Let's try that on a triangle here. Weird, on the triangle it's disappearing below the lowest cutoff frequency, but on the square it seems to be adding. Possibly while I've been making the sound I've left it on triangle, and maybe that's why, just because by ear it sounded similar. So let's knock that into FM territory then. Nice. See if we can do that over here. I've tuned this modulation to the C. Harder to do on this one. And everything I do on this seems to just sound really nice. Let's add a bit of the reverb. Now let's try and do something like that over here. I'll switch the reverb back on, latch on. Not bad, but it doesn't have the same smoothness as the Grandmother, and I wonder if that's because I'm using the sine wave on the Grandmother. Let's just try it on the ramp, even though they act differently, just to see. And I can't get the same effect on the Sub 37 because this does drop below this cutoff frequency. You can hear that's got that sort of undercurrent of the low filter frequency. It's got that real sort of, I don't know, a woof underneath it. We don't get that on this one. So it definitely sounds like it's going below 200 Hertz though. Otherwise you hear the constant rumble. So far we got differences in the oscillators, in that the Grandmother are distinct waveforms and the Sub 37s are variable waveforms, and the mixer is producing a little bit more distortion on the Grandmother. And the way the attenuator acts is slightly different to the way the filter mount and pitcher mount knobs on the Sub 37 work. So we're definitely getting two distinct styles of synth, I think, which I wasn't expecting. Let's try that while we're modulating some pitch then. Let's take the cutoff modulation out of the equation for a second and add some pitch. Modulation, okay. And I think you'll agree on that. That's just everything I just sort of play with sounds nice. So let's stick the reverb back on here and let's try that. Pitch, oscillator 2. Again, that's really nice, isn't it? I'm really impressed with this. Being able to match these sort of sounds. As I say, I've never sat there doing these sort of drone sounds with this, but I lost myself doing it with my grandmother. So we looked at modulation, oscillators, mixers, utilities now. And this has got a high pass, but I don't think there's much mileage in showing you that the Sub 37 doesn't have one, because it doesn't. So let's take a look at the filter. Start with a sawtooth. And you can see and hear straight away that the Sub 37 is a bit duller, as I've noticed in the past. That's just clicking on 10K there. And that's well up around 14 or 15, a little bit brighter on the Grandmother. And just looking at the fundamentals and the next harmonic, they are similar on both. But it's really the top end where the Sub 37 sort of disappears. Okay, so let's add some resonance. And the volume completely disappears there. But just as I take that right to the top, you can see on the right hand side the frequency analysis that it's sticking its little head in, isn't it? At 20 kilohertz, as it says on the tin. So let's cut that down to about 2. You can really hear that coming in all spiky. Ouch. Let's turn that down a bit. Maybe turn the resonance down, because I don't want to deafen anyone. Very nice. Very Moogy. Let's try that over here. So same again, you lose all the volume, and then as I turn it to about 70%, you get that little peak at 20 kilohertz. And again, let's just turn it down to avoid destroying anyone's hearing. And just pulling out those harmonics. So they've got a similar flavour, but they're definitely different. So let's take a quick listen to the noise now. I did mention earlier that the noise is white on the Grandmother, and on the Sub 37 it's pink. So this is duller. It does make a difference though. I do like white noise more than pink, I think. Although the pink does have a sort of really moody and gritty feel. But for general melodic sounds, I found white's easier to use. Let's add oscillator 1, oscillator 2, and drop the cutoff down. So you can hear there's a little bit of noise in there. Helps with the transients. Helps things cut through a mix as well. And now I'm just going to add, let's just take this to here. So the noise is having quite a nice texture to that tone. Can try and do something similar on the sub 37. So add oscillator 1, oscillator 2. Maybe put them in tune. Add some noise. Instantly, it sort of overpowers the sound. And that's because there's much less high frequencies on pink noise. So trying to use it the way I like to use it. The high frequency aren't there, so you've got to whack up the level. And then it overpowers. So doing something like that drone I've just done on the Grandmother. It's there, it's always there. Have some reverb as well. So you can hear it straight away, but you know it does dirty things up much more than the white noise. But I do find the Grandmother's white noise more user-friendly here. So I hope that was of some use. It's not like doing the P6 versus the P8 or the OB6 versus the P6 video, where I'm sort of showing similarities and differences between two very similar keyboards. This is really, is there a distinct tonal difference between the Sub 37 and the Grandmother? And the answer to that is yes, but the Sub 37 can still enter that sort of droney modular territory, obviously without connecting to other synths via CVs. The Grandmother can do that, but its strength really lies in taking these CV ins and outs and plugging them into your modular system. And there's plenty of other little tricks you can do on the Grandmother that I'm not going to go through because there's some really good videos online showing those things, like using the modulator as a third oscillator, and it turns this from a 2 oscillator synth with an LFO to a bit more like the Mini Moog that's got 3 oscillators, one of them which can be used to modulate the others, stuff like that. And the envelope isn't as limited as you might think, because you do have this separate envelope mode here for the amplitude, a bit like a gate with a release. Whilst this can still be used for the filter. But although this has only been brief, I hope it's been of some use to somebody. So if you've got the cash for a sub-fatty or a fatty or the Grandmother, which one's for you? It really depends on how you're going to use it. If you're going to use it in a modular setup and integrate it with other instruments, or do you really need the presets and the editor? Because of the presets and the editor and being able to use those in your DAW, I think is pretty magical, really. If I could only keep really one, which would it be? Sub 37. And I'm saying that almost without thinking, because this is great. Grandmother's is great. It's lovely to sit and play with, but for being in the studio and getting things done, the Sub 37 to me is much more useful. But I've had time to sit and play and plug this into my fuse box and stuff. Maybe if I revisit this in 6 months' time, I come back and say, actually, the Grandmother's really the one for me. But I've just not had enough time, really, to dig into it, I think. and I'm so familiar with the Sub 37. So I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere. See you next time.